Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to the Renaissance Yorkshireman podcast. Today's narrative is a post-capitalist analysis of the nature of the state. Now, obviously, many people have said many things about the state, and there's very little that we can say for sure. One of those things is that the state has a relatively short history in comparison to human evolution, and the second is that it's been an extremely mixed bag. You know, it's delivered in some areas and it's been a catastrophic disaster in other areas. To begin with, let's take a little look at the evolutionary history of humans. According to the National Geographic, at least 200,000 years ago, there were Homo sapiens roaming planet Earth who were essentially the same as us. But it could even be 250,000 years, possibly even longer, but at least 200,000 years. As far as we are aware, the first state arose in Sumer approximately 6,000 years ago. Now, it may be that Plato's stories of Atlantis do actually represent an actual historical state that existed before this time, but as things stand, there isn't enough evidence to support this hypothesis, so I'm going to assume that that is not correct and that the first state arose 6,000 years ago in Sumer. This means that the nature of the state only represents the last 2 to 3% of human evolutionary history. And even then, 6,000 years ago, most people still lived outside the control of the state. It was only around the time of the rise of the Roman Empire, about 2,000 years ago, that more than 50% of the planet's population came under the control of the state. So we're only looking at an absolute maximum of 1% of human history where more than half of Homo sapiens have lived under the control of the state. And it's only really in the last sort of 500 to 600 years that we're looking at more than 99% of people living under the control of the state. So this is 0.5% or less of human time. So the state is a very modern development in human evolutionary history, and obviously it has advantages and disadvantages. So our attempt really must be to minimize the disadvantages and maximize the advantages, while simultaneously accepting that Homo sapiens have the human right to live in non-state forms outside the control of the state. One of the problems that many people make in analysing the state is they're primarily using a political and socio-economic analysis of the state. They very rarely use a psychological analysis of the state. Now, one of the things that they're missing is the dark-triad personality type. But Renaissance Yorkshireman, what is the dark-triad personality type, I hear you ask? The dark-triad personality type is psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Individuals who show this personality type will do anything to get power and to maintain power. And when I say anything, I mean murder, torture, kidnap, rape, blackmail, anything. Anything goes. And we can look at human history and we can see many examples of the dark-triad personality type causing all sorts of problems. Stalin, Chairman Mao, Hitler being classic examples, but we can find them from further back in history, but we can find them closer in history as well. In my view, an excellent example of the dark-triad personality type is from the 2016 election in the United States, when we had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I believe that both of those individuals are suffering from the dark-triad personality type. The main difference being that Donald Trump is more narcissistic than Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton is slightly more psychopathic than Donald Trump. But really, there's not much in it. These two people will pretty much do anything to get power and to stay in power. The mainstream analysis of the state often focuses on things like left and right, or left-right centrist, and this is often quite important, but often it's not as important as many people think it is. What a lot of economists and sociologists and other political scientists failed to do is examine the nature of the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex and the dark-triad personality type go together extremely well, because people who suffer from the dark triad will do anything and everything to stay in power, and usually that will involve inflicting violence or having the threat of inflicting violence on others, both the population of your own state and the population of other states. What are some of the negative externalities of the arms trade? Well, I can tell you because I wrote about them in my book, The Tao of Sustainable Development. Some of the negative externalities include, but may not be limited to, increased incidences of torture, amputation, rape and sexual abuse, child emotional trauma, and this is for the people in war zones. Now, for the veterans who are fighting the wars and come back from wars, there's increased incidence of drug and alcohol abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, homelessness among veterans, incarceration of veterans, increased demands on the welfare state by veterans. There's also increased numbers of refugees, obviously a big problem today. And overall, the military-industrial complex represents negative externalities for the vast majority of the population. They only represent positive externalities for people who suffer from the dark triad personality type and those who are willing to go along with them. Something that all states have in common, regardless of whether they're left-wing and right-wing, is they all have a police force which has a legal monopoly on violence. In many countries, the police are largely not corrupt and largely competent. But in many other countries, there are many corrupt police officers and many of them are quite incompetent. If we look at this table, we can see that essentially there are 4 types of police officer. Corrupt and competent, corrupt and incompetent, honourable and incompetent, honourable and competent. Now, of course, to a certain degree, this is a bit of an oversimplification because competent people do stupid things and even corrupt people sometimes do honourable things. But as a thought exercise, it's very useful. Now, essentially, the only type of police we want are the ones who are competent and honourable. Anyone else simply should not be in the police force, because if we have incompetent and or corrupt people in the police, then it's essentially a system of corruption and abuse. And in which case, it's quite clear that the state is largely dysfunctional and we shouldn't support it. There are solutions to some of these issues. The first solution, which I believe is one of the fundamentals of being a post-capitalist, is that we accept the existence of non-states as well as states. If peaceable humans want to live in communities of about 5,000 or less, Plato's number or less, then they should be allowed to do so. Another possible solution is that we have smaller states, because at the lower level we go down, the easier it is to spot corruption and the easier it is to spot people who have the dark triad personality types. There are various economic solutions, one of which is abandoning debt-based currencies and having non-debt-based currencies, because by their very nature, debt-based currencies that are lent into existence by bankers bearing debt naturally lend themselves to corruption and money laundering in a way that non-debt-based currencies simply don't. 3 other possible political solutions, which I'm going to talk about next week in some of my videos, are sortition, vote for Ron, and a single transferable vote. So if you'd like some homework, you can go and have a look at those on the internet. Thank you for giving me your time today, and I look forward to seeing you in my next videos.